want to start with a couple different questions to see what the experience level is just here in the room. So just to start off, who in here believes in the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs? You get the idea. That's a lot more people than I expected. Okay. Okay. How many of you have ever been on a paranormal investigation? Okay, a couple people. Couple people. Okay. All right. Well, this is going to be a little bit different, so I'm going to take you guys through what the event schedule is going to be like. So the first 30 minutes, I'm going to take you guys through a slideshow talking a little bit about the basics of ghost hunting, who my team is, and then we actually filmed a 30-minute documentary here inside the building you're in now. We'll showcase that, and then you'll have 2 hours from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. to essentially investigate this location. How's that sound? Good? Okay, perfect. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? So, who's WTCW Paranormal? Why do you care? Why are you here? Let me tell you a little bit about what my team does. So, we're Hampton Roads' lead paranormal investigation team. We've been open since 2021, and we've covered over 37 cases to this date of different cases of hauntings, possessions, demons, ghosts, etc. Our goal, really, when we are called into a location is to identify the problem. And, you know, we try to be a little bit more skeptical, I would say, approach things a little bit more methodically. In the event that if somebody calls us in feeling paranoia, feeling fear that their home may be haunted by a ghost, I don't want to tell them that that is the case, you know, if the situation is they have, you know, carbon monoxide poisoning or something like that, right? Don't want to reinforce that anxiety. So we're just going to jump straight into some of the cases we've covered and the best evidence that our team has captured till this point, because you guys came to a ghost hunting event. You want to see some pretty creepy ghost stuff, don't you? I'm imagining, yeah. So this was one of the first cases we covered. It's a location that some of you may have been to before. It's in Virginia Beach. It's the Ferry Plantation House. So by rank, it is considered to be the most haunted location in the state. My personal investigation took place in July of 2022, and for me, it was one of my favorite investigations on the front of simply how much evidence we were able to capture. Okay, and we're gonna jump into some clips now of some of the activity we captured. So this first clip, we were going on what was known as a solo, which is essentially when you go alone into a location, your team stays outside, and you just go in there and film and see if anything happens, because certain people theorize that spirits may react differently when you're alone versus otherwise.
So this is the death room, supposedly the most active room in the house. Get some footage in here. You can feel some really oppressive energy in this room, seriously. What the hell?
Investigations, and you can hear what sounds to be a spirit or whatever you want to call it, intruder, whatever, walking towards me from the floor above. And naturally, I freaked out a little bit. One of my first investigations, not really something that you want to hear. Thank you. So this was later on in the night, whilst I was investigating the slaves' quarters of the location, as it was a plantation.
So, this room, this used to be a courthouse, or at least this side of the house. This was what used to be Henry's room. There's his initial. Guess we'll take a...
In my hand was a laser temperature reader.
Oh, temperature reader right here. Right here. 666 degrees, huh?
As you can see, my flashlight begins malfunctioning, dimming in and out exactly after that moment.
That is a bit odd.
Oh. To which I have the very brave reaction of just leaving the room.
What's going on? Yes, that fixes up. Oh.
In my own defense, It was my first ever investigation. Now,
Oh my god.
moving forward.
What the hell is going
So this is what I like to call the Sunny Farm haunting, and that is because it is a private residence, meaning I can't tell you exactly where it is. Somewhere here in Chesapeake, Virginia. One of the services my team provides is if somebody or somebody they know is experiencing what they believe to be a haunting, I have a business profile. They can just shoot me a call, and after a couple of questions, we can go out there and investigate what is going on. So they called us in because it was this woman by the name of Julie. She moved onto her boyfriend George's farm, and the farm had been in George's family for generations. And at one point in time, it was an Indian burial ground. And at another point in time, it was a Civil War battleground. So it's pretty interesting history going on there. The only reason I was called in personally is because they began experiencing this strange phenomena almost every night around the hour of 3 a.m. original. They had a motion sensing camera set up on the outside of their barn. It was continuously notifying them of motion captured around those hours, and they sent me a clip of what they saw. And you can see what appears to be a bright ball of light, and the majority of the time I try to dismiss what people like to call these ghost orbs. However, this one caught my eye. I initially thought it may have been some kind of insect, but as you can see, when other insects fly by, it looks very different. My next thought was maybe someone's waving a flashlight, but you can't really see anybody there, and I found it compelling. Now, moving forward to the haunted Kokeshi doll. It was gifted to me by an affiliate of mine, an ex-psychic of the team by the name of Lorraine. She was a descendant of the Abe clan in Japan, which has a history of, a lot of spiritualism, Taoism, and things of that nature. A Kokeshi doll is an item that is gifted from generation to generation of children, and the idea is that it captures bad spirits that may be trying to attack her child. When Lorraine's grandmother flew in from Japan to visit her here in the States, she gave down the family heirloom, to which they began experiencing issues in the home. It was passed off to me. It was the first ever item I took in for the sake of paranormal research, and after leaving it in a room alone with an infrared camera, this is what we were able to capture.
Throughout the hour time limit, there were several instances of things being bumped or moved off camera that we picked up on.
Exactly where this was coming from, I'm not sure, but I can guarantee you there was nobody in the room to create those noises. Moving on to the Trinity Apostle Church, located here in Portsmouth, Virginia. And my investigation took place on February 10th of 2024. And this is one of the oldest locations I've ever been in, being built in 1762, and is now considered by the National Historic Society as historic location. Okay, so me and my three-man team split up through different parts of the location. I was taking photos in the cemetery. My lead investigator, late and great William Bateman, was taking photos inside the pews, and our cameraman, Jackson Zingalowicz, was in a different part of the location. And as I was scrubbing through the images that we captured, I came across this image, and as most of us could say, what do you see in this image? I'm curious to ask. Probably nothing, right? Pretty dark, not a lot to see. And that was my initial thought, kind of just breezed past it and continued on editing with the video. However, it wasn't until it was brought to my attention that it seems almost as if there's a figure there in the pews. And I was like, I told to my friend as we were reviewing footage, I said, I'm not sure what you're referring to. He enhanced the image and sent it back to me. What do you guys see now?
At first, I see like a person, like kind of possibly sitting in the
Exactly. Now, my thoughts, of course, approaching investigation the way that I do, very skeptically, trying to debunk things as I go, so I'm not just kind of trapped in an echo chamber of my own beliefs. I said, well, maybe it could be the shadow of the cameraman. I mean, it's directly center and shot, but thinking a little bit harder, there was no backlight to cast that shadow down. So I scrubbed through more of the images and see if I could find a similar angle of where the photo was taken to see if there was anything in the way causing that refraction. Here is a very similar angle, and as you can see, there's really nothing there to generate what was seen. As to what that image is, to this day, I'm still not sure, but I believe it is one of my greatest captures. Moving on to a more recent case, the haunting of the Smith family here in Chesapeake, Virginia. So our investigation was conducted in November of 2024, and this is actually one of the scarier cases I've covered. This haunting was caused by what was essentially satanic worship. And if you're curious to ask if I'm pushing some kind of religious agenda on you, we'll get to religion a little bit later on in the presentation, okay? But the family self-proclaimed they caused the issue. And as you can see, pentagram as soon as you walk in, and what he claimed to be a blood pentagram there on the closet. Similarly to the Kokeshi doll, I decided to set up an infrared camera, just leave it in his bedroom and let it roll with nobody there to see if we were able to capture something alongside a couple motion sensors we set up in there. As you can see right there, that's a motion sensor. Now, we wrapped up that case earlier on in January of this year. However, it was still one of the most interesting cases I've ever covered. Now, let's talk a little bit about theology and the theology of ghost hunting. Now, one thing that you'll know about the act of paranormal research is that it pretty much goes against every religion, period, really. Like, Christianity doesn't like that you're doing it because they think that you're dabbling with demons. Same thing with all the other monotheistic religions. It's kind of in its own weird realm of agnosticism of I'm doing what I want. So I want to get a little bit into the beliefs or standard belief set of most paranormal investigators. Of course, there's nuance to that, but the majority of investigators believe that there are two entities in the ghost hunting realm, being ghosts and demons. And if you're curious where this belief system stems, it's a little bit blurry, but it can be mostly attributed to the late and great Ed and Lorraine Warren of the 1960s, one of the first ever paranormal investigators, who just so happened to be Catholic, okay, which is why they believed in ghosts and demons, and they popularized this belief system, and it's what the majority of investigators followed to this day. So, what's the difference between ghosts and demons? Well, ghosts, by definition, previously human, now stuck in a state between life and the afterlife, meaning that in some capacity they can interact with our physical world, move things, touch things. We can't touch them. We can't always see them either, okay? The entity itself was adapted from Tibetan Buddhism hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but that's not the exact definition taken from religion, slightly morphed, but that's where it comes from. And of the two entities between ghosts and demons, it is the less powerful entity. Okay, now let's talk about demons. Inhuman, live for an infinite number of years, and this particular definition of a demon comes from the demonology studied in the Bible, also known as fallen angel demonology. Okay, so they feed off negative human emotion and energy, which is why the majority of cases that you'll look at, more specifically the Annabelle case, which we'll talk about here in a moment, the demon seems to be trying to scare people for seemingly no reason. The reason being what? That they supposedly feed off of negative emotion and energy. That means fear, anger, sadness, stuff that makes you feel bad, right? And the final goal of when a demonic infestation is taking place, the end game is essentially either for the individual to be possessed by that demon and be killed essentially by the strain of the possession, or to spread fear to those around them. Okay? Now, who here has heard of the case of Annabelle the doll? A lot of people, okay? Very famous. But for those of you who don't know, the cliff notes are this mother bought her daughter this Raggedy Ann doll from an antique store, to which the daughter and her roommate began witnessing the doll moving around and other paranormal activity. To which, out of curiosity, they called in a psychic medium to do a reading over the doll. To which the psychic medium relayed that the spirit of a little girl by the name of Annabelle Higgins was attached to the doll and was asking the two women if it could live with them permanently. They saw no issue with this, and they said, yeah, sure, why not? Immediately after permitting the doll to stay with them, the activity began to grow far worse. Scratches manifested on them. They were being pushed around, nightmares every night. A lot of problems were going on with the family, to which, once again, a lot of things circle back to them. Ed and Lorraine Warren were called in to investigate the doll. They looked into the history of the property, and there was a little girl by the name of Annabelle Higgins killed. However, they believed that this was a fact of demonic infestation. Okay? Now, does anybody have any questions about demons? Because what I'm about to show you is an audio tape of a real demonic exorcism from the case of Anneliese Michel. She was a 16-year-old girl from the 1970s in Germany. And I'm just curious to ask, how many people have heard of the case of Anneliese Michel? Not such a popular one. A couple people, a little bit less. Has anyone here seen the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose? A lot more people. So that movie is based on a true story, the true story being Anneliese Michel. Essentially, the case goes that in the 1970s, a 16-year-old girl from a Catholic family begins experiencing these epileptic seizures and blackouts, to which naturally the family got doctors involved first. Doctors got involved, took her brain scans, and said she has a rare form of epilepsy, we're going to put her on medication, to which they did. And the seizures and blackouts continued. This strange behavior from Anneliese Michel continued, and they continuously brought her back to neurologists, trying desperately to figure out what was wrong with their daughter, to which they met a brick wall, and her daughter wasn't eating. She wasn't drinking. She wasn't doing anything other than blacking out, seizing, and threatening all those around her in a deep voice, saying that she was going to kill them and hurt them. To which, with no other options, they called in the Catholic Church. A man by the name of Father Renz and another man by the name of Father Alt began doing exorcisms upon Anneliese Michel. And since this was only a couple decades ago, audio tapes of this are still around.
Wann bist du überhaupt hier?
Ich hab recht dazu, dass ich in dem Wald rein bin. Ich trag dir die Rotznase noch so lang, bis es lebt wird. Die Saublöderei. Für uns geht's kein Zurück. Sie in alle Ewigkeit.
Pretty scary stuff, and unfortunately this case ended in Anneliese Michel dying. And not only did it end in her dying, it ended up being a medical mystery. She passed away after not eating for 3 months under medical supervision, and also under medical supervision not drinking for 3 weeks. Now, the majority of people will say, you can't live for more than 3 days without drinking anything. How is this possible? Well, it's not. It's not possible. The theory that the physicians and the people who are involved with the case, they're theorizing that maybe she slipped away while they were in between gaps of supervising her to maybe drink water. But the real medical mystery wasn't exactly that either. When she passed away of starvation, they did an autopsy upon her body, and they discovered no ulcers, no lacerations to her muscles, and seemingly she died for no reason. Anybody who dies of starvation will have severe ulcers all over her body. So, if there's any questions, I'd like for you guys to get them out of the way now, because this section is going to be a little bit longer, and I'm not going to be here talking to you guys on stage. As I mentioned previously, we did an investigation here inside the building you're in right now. We recorded it and made a 30-minute mini documentary talking about some of the haunted objects inside the vintage Trixie, investigating them and interviewing the woman herself, Trixie, and some of the other employees. So if anyone is curious about any of the subjects that we've covered so far, any questions for me about some of the cases I've done, then, oh, okay, yeah.
Curious from investigator's point of view, I'm not one. How do you keep your nerve when you're in a place like that? I mean,
Well,
guys are big, strong guys, and girls are, I just feel like I would,
Yeah,
it's be running out the door.
it definitely takes a certain type of person to get into it, kind of, a little bit out there. But just like any other skill, you kind of just get used to it over time. The first couple times you do it, very nerve-wracking, and you'll hear all sorts of crazy stories like the one I just covered with Annalise Michel, and you're going to go into the investigation thinking you're going to get picked up and thrown into a wall by a demon like in the movies. And I can stand here and say 3 years later that has never happened to me, nor have I witnessed it happen to anybody. Which, when we get into the investigation portion, I believe that you guys will realize that for yourself. I believe that paranormal research is not quite as dangerous as people may have led you to believe. Okay? Any other questions?
What ended up happening to those two girls that got that, ragdoll and those kind of
The two nurses who owned the Annabelle doll. So when Ed and Lorraine Warren were called to get involved with the item, they took it in for themselves and brought it to the church to be blessed and other things to be performed on it. As I said, they were Catholic Christian. To which they took the doll in and gave it to one of the fathers that their team, NESPR, the New England Society for Paranormal Research, they gave it to one of their priests to drive to their home in New England, right? The priest had it in the back of his car, and as he was driving, he claimed that when he looked in the rearview mirror with Annabelle behind him in the back seat, that his car swerved out of control and he drove into a lake. To which Ed and Lorraine Warren themselves had to go pick up the Annabelle doll and brought it to their museum. How many of you have heard about Ed and Lorraine Warren's museum in Connecticut? That's a pretty famous one. Think about a paranormal story you've heard of. Amityville, Perrin Family, The Conjuring, their fault, okay? So you've probably heard of them before. The Annabelle doll, to this day, is still held in their museum in Connecticut, to which there are stories coming out about experiences with it still to this day. That's where it sits. Any other questions?
The one with the little boy the son doing the satanic worship, were you able to send it on the way? Or?
Thankfully, I can say I was able to do that, yeah. So when we were called in, we did 4 consultations with the family. The first, we were just kind of feeling out the situation, interviewing the family, doing a walkthrough of the home, and just getting a general vibe for everything going on. And then we did some light investigating, which is actually where that clip of the door opening on its own came from. That was the haunting at its worst when we first came in. Some of the stories they told us, truly disturbing stuff. They said that before calling me in, the son, who still lived with them, actually had to move his bedroom downstairs from upstairs where he used to do his research because of how bad the activity was. When we did bring the son upstairs to his bedroom to tell us a little bit more about what was going on, he said that he hadn't been up there alone for 5 years. He refused to go into what was pretty much his own bedroom. His mother testified that they would lock themselves in their room after 9 o'clock and wouldn't come out. And if they did come out, they would use a buddy system because they were so afraid of the activity going on in the home. And I could say, yeah, that was one of the most active cases I've ever done. And straight out of a horror movie. Most of the paranormal investigation you cover, it's really just, oh, my uncle died, I think he might be here if you can come in. This was straight up satanic worship going on in this house. Nothing like anything I've covered before. So we did our investigation and made a little documentary about it. It's on our YouTube channel. This is actually the thumbnail for it. And we called in Father Grant of Trinity Apostle Church to do a blessing upon the home. And I'm still in contact with the Smiths, and they say they haven't had any activity occur for the last 3 months since Father Grant blessed the home. Any other questions? I saw you had one.
I was going to ask the same
Same thing. Yeah, no, we were able to, help the family out. Actually, they left a review on the WTCW business profile saying that, yeah, haven't had any problems since then, which made me really happy to hear because they were telling me that they had been pretty much scared to live in their own house for half a decade to that point. Any other questions?
Did you do anything to protect yourself before?
For me, it's just some really, really basic stuff. I'll like sage occasionally, but it's not so much for me. I think that the power of belief is very powerful. So if you have the idea in your head that nothing can touch you, at least in this paranormal realm, most of the time it won't. Especially when it comes to the modern theology of a paranormal investigator. When we talk about demons, they feed off of this negative energy. If you go into a location and you're very clearly afraid of what's going on, that would be more attractive to a demon to attach to you. Following that logic, which, mind you, this is all pseudoscience, okay? This is just an amalgamation of testimonials coming from hundreds and hundreds of years of ghost encounters, looking at patterns and kind of making deductions from that. But occasional saging, but I don't do too much for myself, no, and I've never suffered any issue, any attachment, nothing like that, no. Safer than you think. Yeah.
I was wondering, crap, I just lost it, sorry.
No pressure.
Do you base most of your research on the older stories? Because I feel like stories like Annabelle or Robert the Doll, they're very word of mouth. I feel like through generations, they could have been scattered, and using that advice, I feel like.
Well, the stories I personally find the most compelling come from more modern cases of the paranormal. Why don't I listen to all the ghost stories of the spiritualist movement of the 1700s? Well, I can tell you why. Because if you had a headache, they'd drill a hole in the side of your head. Alright, they were idiots. They didn't know what they were talking about. So, most of the time, when I take a case into consideration, it's mostly as soon as, as close to today as possible. One of the most compelling cases I've ever come across was the case of the Ammons haunting in Gary, Indiana. This took place in the 2010s, and the only reason that this ghost story became popular is because the whole police force, the whole police department from Gary, Indiana was involved with that case. So all the paranormal stories you hear from that house come from police officers. The lieutenant himself claims that he was able to capture an EVP when they were doing a wellness check on the Ammons. I find that to be one of the most compelling cases I've ever looked at. Another good example, how many of you guys have heard of Skinwalker Ranch? That's that's a popular one, right? The reason that case is so compelling isn't just the original story from the family who moved in, but because a millionaire by the name of Robert Bigelow, after seeing the story on the news, bought the property and built a team of people with PhDs and scientists. They called it NIDS. And they put all these researchers on the property to detect what he liked to call high strangeness, which they certainly did. And there's still photos and videos from that case of just scientists. All right, no goofy ghost hunters like me were there, just scientists. I find that case very compelling.